Hi everyone, we are going to continue from where we ended last time. So today we are going to pick it up from cell membrane transport. But the last time we were looking at total body water and fluid compartments, which is also part of cell physiology. Okay, so like I said last time in the previous video that I made, I emphasized that cell physiology is very important as a foundation or as a background of physiology. So you need to get these concepts before you start learning about other systems. Okay, what is cell membrane? Okay, and what is transport? So when you talk about cell membrane transport, what are you trying to talk about? You're trying to talk about the plasma membrane. Okay, so this plasma membrane, what's its function? So it's known as a selectively permeable bilayer membrane, okay, or phospholipid bilayer membrane, okay. It's able to choose certain substances that can go in and out at a particular period of time, okay. So it's selectively permeable, okay. So at this stage, we're supposed to understand what does it allow and what doesn't it allow, okay. So we need to know which molecules can go through it easily and which molecules are not able to go through it easily, okay. What type of transport mechanism do they use? Okay, at this stage you are going to talk about also what we call the simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion. Then there's also active transport, which has got bulk transport and other type of transport mechanisms. So that's what we're going to talk about at this stage. So a cell membrane, this is a structure or an organelle that is found on a cell. Okay, it's able to allow access to certain substances, or we can say it's selectively permeable. Okay, and it has got different structures which are bound to the cell membrane. There are proteins there which are able to regulate the transport of certain substances. So we are going to start by talking about the transport of different substances. Okay, so what particles can cross the cell membrane? Okay, so when you look at the cell membrane and by its nature, okay, it has got what we call the inner part of the cell membrane. When you magnify it or when you zoom in, you're going to find it has got what we call bipolar. It has got the tails which are hydrophobic and the heads which are hydrophilic. Okay, so the heads which are hydrophilic, which are water liking, are found at the what surface of the cell membrane. Then the ones which are hydrophobic, which are nonpolar, are found where inside the cell membrane. Okay, the reason why the hydrophobic heads are found at the surface is because they can interact with water properly. Okay, so when you look at the nature or the way the cell membrane is made, it's made to facilitate or to allow transport or controlled transport of certain substances into and out of the cell membrane. Okay, so when you look at gases such as oxygen, oxygen is able to cross through the cell membrane without any problems. Okay, even carbon dioxide and also lipid-like substances, okay, or lipophilic what substances such as alcohol, they can cross through the cell membrane easily. But there are challenges which come in when substances which are what polar face challenges to cross in. For example, sodium or many ions are unable to cross through the cell membrane. They need what we call either a carrier protein or a channel protein. So a carrier protein and a channel protein, these are two different things that you need to understand, okay, which we'll talk about later. So now let's try to define the different types of transports. Okay, so now we'll try to talk about the cell membrane. Now let's try to talk about different types of transport system across the cell membrane. Number one, there's what we call diffusion. And number two, there's what we call active transport. So under diffusion, you've got what we call simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Okay, so simple diffusion, this is the movement of particles from a region of high to region of low concentration, okay, along the concentration gradient. Okay, then it does not need any energy for the particles to cross. They just follow the difference in the concentration gradient. Okay, so they move from where it's high to where it's what low. Then we can also describe another part of transport mechanisms, such as osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water molecules from high to lower concentration. Okay, so it can be also be described as what? Simple diffusion. Although when you go in areas such as the collecting ducts, you are going to find we have got what we call aquaporins 1 and aquaporins 2 and aquaporins what? 3. Okay, but right now our major focus is not to talk about that. Okay, yeah, so we're talking about osmosis. Then when you talk about what we call facilitated diffusion, okay, this is the most interesting part about the transport of this substance across the cell membrane. So when you talk about facilitated diffusion, when we look at the word facilitated, it means helped diffusion. Okay, so molecules which are polar, for example ions, sodium, potassium, chlorine, all those bicarbonate, they need what? Some help. Okay, they need something to come to help them, to assist them cross. How do they do that? How they manage to do that is when they use what we call channel proteins. Okay, so channel proteins are able to carry ions across the selective bilayer membrane, okay, easily. Then there's what we call carrier proteins. Carrier proteins are able to carry what we call molecules, okay, for instance glucose, and ions also. So for channel proteins they only carry what? Ions. But for carrier proteins they carry both ions and what? Molecules together. Because for glucose it cannot cross through the cell membrane without any help. Okay, that's where insulin comes in. That's where S-GLUT1 comes in. That's where GLUT2 comes in, and other transporter molecules which are found in the cell membrane. Okay, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Let's talk about active transport. Active transport is a transport of substances, okay, with the use of what? Energy. Okay, so the movement of substance from a region of high to a region of lower concentration, okay, with the help of energy. So from low to high, that's what? Active transport. When you're moving from a low concentration to what? A higher concentration with the help of what? Energy. Okay, so energy is a factor, and at the end you can say against the concentration gradient, the movement of a substance from a low to higher region against the concentration gradient, and it requires energy. Okay, we'll talk about that. Then at the same stage, when we talk about different types of pumps, okay, let's go on the next slide. So function of membrane selective permeability and transport. Okay, so when you look at this diagram, okay, it looks very small and what, but there's a lot of things that you can learn from there. So selectively permeable allows some substances to pass. Only small uncharged molecules or flat soluble molecules can pass through membrane without help diffusion. Okay, so help diffusion is known as what? Without help diffusion, which is known as what? Passive transport. Okay, so passive transport means there's no energy added. Okay, there's facilitated and there's also simple diffusion. So now let's try to zoom in. I think this is where the information is, a lot of information that we need to understand as we go along. Okay. So when you look at this diagram, okay, let me try to go through. So let's do this. In total body water, we talked about certain things which are going to be applied. No wonder before you watch this video, you have to watch first total body water. So what you are looking here is known as a what? A selectively permeable membrane. So like I said, it's a lipid bilayer membrane. Okay, no wonder it allows what like substances to go through easily, carbon dioxide and oxygen. Then when you look at this, you're going to find that we have got what we call here, what we are seeing here is known as the what? Extracellular fluid, okay, or ECF. So ECF, you know that what's the most abundant cation which is found in the ECF? It's what? Sodium. Okay, what's the most abundant cation that's found in the what? In the cytoplasm. I mean, in the cytoplasm of the cell is what? Potassium. Okay, then if you look at this, we are going to look at these structures you are seeing here are known as what? Carrier proteins. No wonder they are looking even huge. Even the substances that are able to transport, sorry, are a bit bigger as compared to the other one. Then when you look at the channel proteins, they transport only what? Ions. Okay. So lipid soluble solutes are able to cross through the membrane easily because it's non-polar, and then they're also non-polar, so it's easy for them to cross through. Then if you look at the transport protein here, which is known as the carrier protein, okay, then channel protein, lipid soluble solutes, okay, and concentration gradient, okay. So this arrow is trying to show the concentration gradient. Then when you go a bit up, I want us to now appreciate that there's what we call simple diffusion, channel mediated facilitated diffusion, and carrier mediated facilitated diffusion, okay. So what we are going to talk about this, so we have a simple diffusion. I'm going to give an example, okay. So for instance, if there's oxygen here, okay, as cross it goes, this is the interstitium, okay. So if oxygen goes here, it can cross through this membrane easily to go into the tissues, or to go inside the cell, okay, so that it can perform or it can react with glucose in the mitochondria to produce energy, H2O plus carbon dioxide, okay. Yeah, the crossing of oxygen here is known as what? Simple diffusion, because it does not need any help or any energy, known as passive diffusion, okay, or simple diffusion. Then when you look at channel mediated facilitated diffusion, okay, there's what we call leaky channels, okay. So leaky channels are able to cross substances here from here to there with the help of channel proteins, okay. That is known as what? An example of channel mediated facilitated what? Diffusion, okay. For example, let me do this. There's what we call, number one, there's what we call antiport. There's also what we call symport and uniport. So these transport pathways are different. When you talk about antiport, it means substances are moving in opposite direction, okay. Two substances are moving in what? Opposite direction. It might be in P3, but in opposite what? Direction. But when you talk about symport, it means they are moving in the same direction, okay. Then when you talk about uniport, it means one substance being transported in one direction. So if you look at this one, this is what? Symport. Uniport, sorry. This is known as what? A uniport. Okay. But we also have got what we call a different types of transport which happens in the carrier protein, okay. So look at this. Let's give an example. If we have different types of pumps, okay, there are about 4 different types of pumps that are found in our body or in the human body. There's got one. There's what we have, which is called sodium potassium ATPase pump, okay. There's what we call the calcium ATPase pump. There's what we call the hydrogen pump, and there's also what we call the hydrogen potassium ATPase pump. There are 4, okay. So you need to understand that we also have a certain type of pump that's found in almost each and every cell, which is what? The sodium potassium ATPase pump, okay. So we are going to talk about it when you're talking about glucose transport across the what? The cell membrane, okay. As we know, let's say this greenish structure is glucose, okay. Then there's supposed to be another ion like this, is what? Sodium, okay. So if this is a carrier protein, okay, then on the other side, this is the apical membrane. Then there's also supposed to be a basolateral membrane at the other end. So on the basolateral membrane, you're going to have what we call a sodium potassium ATPase pump, okay. So that pump, once ATP binds to it, it's going to be activated, which will be pumping 3 sodium out, okay, because sodium is high in the ECF, which will give us what? It will be going against concentration gradient. Then potassium, 2 potassium in. Potassium is high in the what? In the ICF, which will also be against the concentration gradient. So the pumping of 3 sodium out of this cytoplasm, it will create an influx of sodium, okay? There's going to be a low concentration of what? Sodium. So once you have a low concentration of sodium here, what is going to happen? It's going to cause this carrier protein, you're going to call it sodium glucose transport 1, which is S-GLUT1, sodium glucose transport 1, okay? So this carrier protein cannot work without glucose, the large molecule, and the ion sodium binding to it. So when the ion sodium and glucose bind to it, it's going to cause the carrier protein to open up like this, okay, so that it can co-transport these two substances. One is called co-transport of glucose. It's also called what? Secondary active transport, because there's a primary active transport taking place at the sodium potassium ATPase pump. So once those two ions, the ion binder and the molecule, is going to open up and transport both of them into the cell membrane, which is known as a what? A symport. So we have talked about sodium glucose transport, which is known as co-transport of glucose. So that's what happens. So that's how things are transported during what? Diffusion, okay? Or passive diffusion, okay? That's how what happens. So the next lecture will be on what? Active transport. So thank you very much for your time. Go through, ask questions where you're not clear, and I'll get back to you. This is the end. Next time we'll look at active transport.